I purchased my 2001 MR2 Spyder a couple years ago to have a low-cost track car. That didn't go exactly according to plan, but the new engine and wide body on the car is just the start. With the support of Advanced Auto Parts, the MR2 is going wheel-to-wheel racing. On the previous episode of the MR2 build, we picked up a hardtop and had a full 8-point cage fabricated for the car. We then took the Spyder down to Cal and Rich at Al's Auto Body to install our YouTuber special APR wide body kit. The car now outfitted with the automotive equivalent of a BBL, we've come to see the MR2 expert, Marc at Frankenstein Motorworks.
I want to make the MR2s look as good as they can, and I think you need some help with that.
Yeah, we'll get there,
All right, let's get started.
Okay, let's do it.
I'd like to address the electrical. When I wired this up, you basically had a factory interior, and now you've got about an extra 30 pounds of wiring in here. That is, it's not just weight, because you're gonna have to add weight for your class anyways, but it's a bit of a liability, just sitting there dangling. So I'm thinking, to get you in and out of here quickly, we're gonna go ahead and steal a bunch of wiring from my race car, because it's no good. It works, it runs my car, it's been running it for 5 years now, and we'll just put it in here.
Yeah, perfect. We are going to do a number of upgrades to the car today. I am gonna just dive on into upgrading the brakes. If you've seen any of our past track videos with the MR2, it was great. It broke wonderfully right up until I more than doubled the horsepower without changing the brake setup at all.
Yeah, I overtook that grass. I was testing out braking points and I broke a little bit too late. Why does this, oh my God. I apologize, man. It was the same thing. I broke earlier. I put a new engine in this, so it has a lot more power. And I'm just trying to learn the compression, the braking zone.
Now the brakes are definitely one of the weakest links of the car when it's on track. They're not competent anymore to reliably stop the MR2. So we're gonna go to some bigger brakes.
I've got the wiring out of my race car, so I'm just making a couple changes to it to make it adequate for Ben's car, mostly just removing features that he's not using, and we'll put it in there. I know this is a minimal harness that's as simplified as it can be. It's reliable. We'll put it in there and should work well for him. So what we've got here is a Scion TC harness that we've modified so that it plugs in where the 1ZZ harness plugs in, and conveniently, both harnesses actually use these same connectors, so it's just a question of actually pulling the pins out, moving them to the appropriate location and pinning them back in. In this case, it's a little bit different because we're running a Haltech. That's why you've got these here that I need to figure out what to do. Things like the fan control is being handled by the ECU. Normally it's being handled by the body controller. So there's a few minor differences. That's why I've got some flags here. But so right now I'm just switching the pin out of my old race car harness to match Ben's race car.
So we're gonna pull the axles out and replace those later on today with some more like race grade axles that Marc has fittingly Frankenstein together. So I'm gonna go ahead and start pulling these axles out, and I've also just noticed that this wheel bearing is not good. So kind of two birds with one stone. We can change out the wheel bearing in the middle of changing the axle out. Just pressed these apart, and I was trying to do this on the car with a hammer and a splitter to try and get this dust shield off. There's zero chance I would have separated this wheel bearing from the hub. That was basically welded together, all as a result of just years and years of, look at that, years of neglect. Ah, wow. The whole point of us disassembling the spindle from the wheel bearing and taking off the dust shield was just to get the dust shield off, either tearing it off or actually removing it in one piece. The reason we're doing that is because we're doing a big brake kit and we're going to get bigger rotors, and the bigger rotors aren't going to fit behind these tiny little OEM dust shields. The nice part is now we get to put it all back together, and we get to do so with anti-seize available at Advance Auto Parts. And hopefully, using liberal amounts of anti-seize on all these mating surfaces, we are never going to have to deal with wheel bearings that are that seized again.
Now comes time to start installing some brakes. What we're going to be using here is actually the kit that I make. It's designed for all the endurance racing that I do. We're going up to 11 3/4 inch rotors. These will just barely fit most 15-inch wheels, and you can see the comparison. So this is the old fronts versus the new fronts. These are hat style, which they're designed for racing, right? They're designed for, I run one weekend on these and then I can service them. They're cost effective. You know, they're fantastic race pads, but they're cost effective to replace and they don't brake fade. We've got this custom bracket, and for the calipers, we're going from single piston calipers all the way around to 4-piston calipers, and specifically in the front, they're 1 3/4 inch for all 4 pistons, and in the rear, they're 1 3/8 pistons.
One part of this process that's made a lot easier is any random parts that we happen to need, because Marc has done basically everything already before on this car, which if you recall, we raced at Lemons in a 14-hour race. This is the car that blew the motor, but we've got his wheelwood brake setup. This is the same setup that I'm gonna be running on my car, and to save him some time on machining these little hub-centric rings, we're just sealing them off of his car, along with the top hats for the rotors that I'm gonna be running.
Because I foolishly budgeted only 1 day for what is easily 4 days worth of work, I'm going to leave the car here with Marc so that he can finish up the wiring the way that he'd like, while also buttoning up the axles and brakes.
When we built Ben's car last time, it was just for a couple laps at a time. On the racetrack, I found over the years that these axles tend to heat up, and when they heat up, they grow, and that makes the heating problem worse, and they just melt down. The reason for that is they're too tight. They're too new. I never managed to wear them in, so they overheat. These are the axles that we did for them last time. These are just remixed RAV4 axles, and we're going to these Porsche 930 style CV joints. And the advantage here, it's multiple pieces, which makes it easier to service, right? When you get one bad part, you can simply replace the bad part. The other big advantage is these joints, if we take a look at this, you can see they travel on both sides. So instead of a typical CV joint that will stay in one spot on the fixed side and all of your wear ends up there, you end up with being able to spread your wear over about 25 millimeters, which gives you a whole lot more space. Things don't heat up as much. They just generally stay cooler and last a lot longer. Some of the other tricks I've done, these are actually off of a Dodge Durango front axle drive shaft, and we're just gonna take this, we're gonna cut it down. You know, we can be doing 120, 130 miles an hour, and this boot can't blow up like some of the boots do. This is convenience of the desert racing guys. These are available just right off the shelf. They go right into here, and they're available in any length, and it's our center shaft. So basically we can make custom axles, whatever length we need. I have these flanges made that bolt right to the CV. I machine these down, as you can see. It's just a stock CV cut down, and then this gets welded on. This right now, what we're putting in Ben's car, is a relatively cheap joint, but if he ever starts having problems with these, there's all kinds of upgrades available that'll put up to basically any amount of horsepower and anything that he can throw at it. But realistically, just having these fixes the problem. We don't need expensive joints here. It's been about 3 days worth of work on the car now. So the big thing, and the reason why we came here today, is the engine harness, now that I've had time, is much cleaner. As you can see, it's just more neat, more organized, will lead to less failures on track. And then if we follow the engine harness inside the cab, you'll see we've decluttered a lot in there. Particularly if we look inside, I've removed all of the supplementary restraint system, all the airbags and whatnot, the seatbelt warning lights, and all that stuff's been stripped. That adds up to a surprisingly large number of wires. So this is simplified, makes it easier to find bugs if you're on the track, and just generally makes it neater in here. I've also mounted the gauge cluster on the new cage. I also wired up your fuel level, which should be pretty handy on track, especially as you start doing longer and longer sessions. And then if we go around on the bottom of the car here, we've got the brakes. These are the brakes that I use on my endurance race car. There was enough people that were asking about these that I made them production parts. So these brakes are quite large. And what I've done here, this adjusts here the vacuum going to the brake booster dynamically. And this makes it so that there's less assist without completely removing the assist. So it gives you a better pedal feel. And it's just an evaporative emissions solenoid and a torque converter lockup switch. And that right there is doing the regulation of the pressure. It's just on, off to achieve the desired vacuum pressure inside there. Another big change for chassis reinforcement is this bar right here, this diagonal bar. This is a big weakness in the MR2 Spyder. That's just a U hanging in the middle of space. There's nothing reinforcing it, and your steering box is attached to it. So every time you get steering forces, the whole U just bends one way and the other. This allows you to keep your camber that you've got on your tires in your turn, which makes a huge steering difference. The turn-in is a lot crisper and just generally a lot more responsive. I'm sure you're gonna wanna do a lot of suspension adjustments to get this thing set up for the track, but overall, it should just be, unfortunately, you're gonna have to add a lot of weight for it for GLTC. You're gonna have to find places to add that weight, but this car should be pretty close to ready for the track. I can't wait to see what you do with it on track. Hopefully, less spinning out.